So let's jump to it. So our first turning point, Declaration of Independence. Right? And it may be obvious, so we're going to talk a little bit more around the edges of it and look at it in a more deep way. So July 1776. A couple things to keep in mind about the Declaration. Nobody's thinking about independence. This is where we get into that trap of inevitability. Something is inevitable. That in 1765 we rioted over the Stamp Act. That means Americans want their independence. No way. Americans don't want their independence. They want a better deal. They want to be treated fairly within the imperial or the royal system. So nobody's thinking about it at the Stamp Act. We're furious. We feel like we're being mistreated. We're being treated like children during the Stamp Act. We riot. We tar and feather people. We issue proclamations. We get organized. We have a Stamp Act Congress. And it looks like we're really kind of flexing our independence muscles. We're not. We're just trying to get Parliament off our backs, get the king to protect us like he's supposed to. And I'm going to skip through all this pre-revolutionary stuff, but the Boston Massacre, right? Here's Paul Revere's famous, incredibly propagandistic depiction of the Boston Massacre. Surely this is the one that made Americans sit up and say, we are out of here. No. I usually say to my students, how many hundred people were killed in the Boston Massacre? It's 5. 5 as in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. We call it the massacre because this is a great example of the early history of spin and politics. But we get angry, we denounce it, but then everybody calms down and just gets back to what they're doing. Tea Party, 1773. That's where you can draw the line. You can see that people are thinking that maybe we are not going to get a fair deal. But what the key thing about the Tea Party is that that's what convinces the British that things are reaching a turning point and they need to drop the hammer on us. And it's when they do that, in the wake of the Tea Party in 1773, that we start to fast forward towards this eventual, not inevitable, eventual decision about independence, especially once the shooting begins in 1775. And in 1776, Tom Paine, one of the great figures in American history who doesn't get nearly enough credit, Tom Paine writes Common Sense. And Common Sense, just think about the title. He's talking to America. It's one of the most widely read, widely distributed pamphlets in American history on a proportional basis. And he's basically saying to Americans, wake up. You've been trying to get a better deal from the king, from the parliament, and all that stuff. It's not going to happen. It is folly to believe that an island can rule a continent. We need to go our own separate way. Independence is common sense. And it's that document, and also things happening on the ground, that make people realize, it's a radical decision. It's dangerous. It's fraught with all kinds of problems. It probably won't work, but we're going to do it. And so that's the key thing. 1775, 76, that's when we start leaning towards independence, but not up to that point. Then in 1776, in July of 1776, the war is a year old, and nobody wants to write the Declaration. It's we think of who wouldn't leap at that opportunity to kind of put on paper who we are and what we're doing. Nobody wants to write it. It's because it's considered a pro forma piece of paper. It's something you just have to do. You have to write down why you're doing what you do. Well, they finally get these guys, Jefferson, Adams, and Franklin, kind of an all-star cast. And they're willing to do it. There are two others who are less important. And they sit down, and Jefferson writes it, and then the other two heavily edit it. And that's where we get the Declaration from. But the Declaration is essentially a declaration of war. And the first part that we love, the Declaration that defines all these great values, that was sort of considered fluff. The key part was the last 2/3, where we said, we are breaking away from Great Britain for these reasons. The king has done all these terrible things to us. He's sent troops, he's taxed us to death, he's dissolved our legislatures, he has. That's the key part that we need to explain to the world. But Jefferson does put that flowery philosophical treatise at the beginning, and that, as we'll see, will have legs. Two things. One is, he says something that is not necessarily focused on at the time, but becomes exceedingly important over time, which is that natural rights, endowed by our Creator, natural rights, our rights, the rights of individuals, the rights of citizens, the rights of a society, come not from a king who deigns to give you your rights and can therefore take them back, but it's like gravity. It's part of the natural world. It's from God. And that is a key concept. it may not sink in right away, but it begins to sink in over time. And the other thing is, and this, I remember hearing Joseph Ellis, the great historian, talk about this. He says, think about this. He says, endowed with certain inalienable rights, among these are. What's important about that? It means we're not going to give you, it's not just life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Those are just the three that come to mind. Those are maybe the three most important, but they're not the only ones. So Jefferson, whether he meant to or not, creates space for this notion of individual rights, of human rights, of liberty to be expanded as we move forward in history, as circumstances unfold. So, and then the other thing about the document is nobody cares about it. It's stuck in a drawer, and it's not considered this sacred document that's put under bulletproof glass, and people rhapsodize about it. July 4th itself is not really celebrated all that much until the 1790s. So there's this kind of dramatic painting by Trumbull. It gives us this false notion that there was a drumbeat and then the Declaration was dropped. It's the 1790s. When the parties are forming, when the Jeffersonian Republicans are facing off against the Federalists, and the Jeffersonian Republicans fancy themselves as, small d Democrats, the party of the people, and they think of Hamilton's Federalists as the monarchists, the people that really want to reinstate or at least bring back some of the vestiges of monarchy. It's really ugly. Politics was not, or dirty politics and angry and ugly politics was not invented yesterday. It's been with us for a long, long time. And here's Jefferson being depicted by the Federalists burning the Constitution, or trying to burn the Constitution, and the bald eagle is intervening. So when you are under attack, and when your guy is under attack, Jefferson, you begin to pump him up. And you begin to say, he's the guy that wrote the Declaration of Independence, the people's document. And he is our man, and he's being unfairly treated. And so there's this kind of late reverence for the Declaration of Independence in the 1790s, early 1800s. And slowly but surely, we start to reverence, the document slowly becomes this sacred document, and we start to celebrate the 4th of July on a regular basis, and it becomes part of our national heritage. But it's not from the, there's not a whole lot of July 4thing going on in 1777 or 1787. It's an evolving tradition. And then when Jefferson, when he plans for his death, being Jefferson, of course, he says, this is what I want on my tombstone. And he puts down the three things he thinks are the most important. Leading off, of course, is the Declaration of Independence. So we eventually get to see it as an important thing. Now let's take a quick second here to look at the long-term significance. I think I could stop now and you'd see the Declaration is pretty important. The long-term significance is that people take it and use it. And they use it for their own purposes. Here's Elizabeth Cady Stanton. She convenes the Women's Rights Convention, 1848, Seneca Falls, New York, and rewrites in the early, takes the Declaration of Independence, kind of heretical, and rewrites it as a feminist manifesto, and writes right at the very beginning that all men and women are created equal. And people laugh at it, but it becomes this kind of marker that's put down, and eventually women's rights becomes a real thing, suffrage becomes a real thing, and so forth. And she had a reference point to which to make that point, right? And I love this cartoon. This is from, I think, 1915. So almost 100 years later, there's a suffragist who's rewriting the Declaration of Independence, and notice Thomas Jefferson's looking on, and notice he's not angry, he's curious. I never thought of that. It's kind of an interesting, it's a beautiful piece of political, I don't want propaganda, but political messaging there, right? All men and women are created equal. And then, of course, labor parties take it and use it. You can buy a book of 100 declarations of independence that are all rewritten in this manner. So this is the Working Men's Party, and for the full benefit of their labor, right? They change the words where they need the words changed. Lincoln, of course, references it. And by now, it's clearly become a sacred document, dedicated to the proposition that all men are created equal, right? That comes a direct quotation from the Declaration. Martin Luther King, in his famous I Have a Dream speech, which we don't pay nearly enough attention to the other stuff in that speech, but that's another thing. But he talks about the Declaration of Independence. And he says, this is, we were founded on this idea. This note was a promise that all men, yes, black men, of course he's using man, but he means men and women, as well as women, would be guaranteed unalienable rights of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. He's saying we have these rights and they've not been respected. We are here to get them respected. And of course, how many of you have ever read the Declaration of Independence of Vietnam? Written in 1945 by a guy named Ho Chi Minh. It starts with these words: all men are created equal. They are endowed by their Creator with certain, this is a document that has global significance. And it all starts in July of 1776. All right, so let's hold that thought for a moment.